Hi, and welcome to Extraordinary Pursuits, a podcast from BIP Ventures. I'm your host, Rochelle Kuramoto. Join me each week for masterclasses and conversations about the skills and experiences that matter most to startups in the innovation economy. You will hear from subject matter experts and founders. We're here to inspire, inform, and occasionally even entertain you. Let's get started. In this episode, we are joined by Noelle London, the founder of Illoominus, a technology platform that works within HR systems to help organizations build and scale efficient, cost-effective, high-performing teams. Noelle is an entrepreneur and an incredible entrepreneurial supporter whose background spans corporate, civic, nonprofit, and startup environments. In this conversation, Noelle shares her experience, her knowledge of HR KPIs, and a host of resources. This is a must listen for founders and for people leaders who are striving to advance their business through their people. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Extraordinary Pursuits from BIP Ventures. Today on the show, we are so happy to welcome Noelle London. She is the founder of a company called Illoominus. Noelle is a longtime, very experienced entrepreneur who saw a problem and set out to fix it. And today we're going to talk about what that is and how she's doing it and what it might mean for your rapidly scaling startup. So Noelle, welcome.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. It's great to be here. And you all are such a good friend here in Atlanta to founders and startups. So appreciate you bringing me on.
Absolutely. I think this is going to be a great conversation. You and I have had a chance to meet and work together a bit in the past, and it's been really fun kind of coming a little bit full circle with you and your company, Illoominus. Before we get into the company, though, I want you to share your background with our listeners because if I'm not mistaken, you are one of those true entrepreneurs who knew from a young age, if I'm not mistaken, a jewelry entrepreneur as a teenager, who is just in this for life. You've got it. And so, the highlights that I noticed from your background, and then I'm going to ask you to tell your own story, but jewelry business at 15, Peace Corps working with female founders, the Atlanta Mayor's Office of Startup Economic Development, launching incubators and venture funds, and then going on to build a really impressive startup of your own. So I'm kind of intimidated and blown away by you. Can you give us a little bit of your version of your background, and don't be too humble?
Well, thanks, Rochelle, and some good highlights that you pulled there. But yeah, I think you're very right. And then I think I have been a lifelong entrepreneur, but I don't think I have the word for it for a really long time. I did start a business when I was a teenager. Convinced a friend's mom to let me sell my jewelry in her boutique. I had no business being able to do any of that. But, I think it's always been, I'm a left brain and I'm a right brain person. And so just this idea of creative problem solving. As you mentioned, Peace Corps actually played a really big part in my journey and, in what we're building today. I went down to Nicaragua being told I was going to teach entrepreneurship in Spanish in 3 months. And I didn't know what the word entrepreneurship was. And so, I was like, what in the world? I'm not, who am I? And what is this thing that we're talking about? And I think I really learned early on, it is all about creative problem solving. And that's really motivating to me. I had the opportunity to work with some amazing women founders while I was there. Saw, it's a possibility and it's an opportunity. And I knew I wanted to be a founder. And so for the next decade plus, I got ready for my act. And so I knew something that I am really passionate about within the entrepreneurial community is this idea of everybody's paying it forward. Everybody's helping each other out. I'm introducing you to somebody that maybe can help your business, and you're helping me along the way when it's time for me to start mine. And so, for over a decade, what I did is I put myself in and around startups. And the reason I did that is I wanted to, one, learn how you build great companies, and two, help a lot of people along the way because I knew at some point it was going to be my turn. And so I wore a lot of different hats. I wore the investor hat. I know when I was at Accenture Ventures leading our South market, had the chance to work with some folks on your team, had the chance to bring in some of your portcos to introduce them into our corporate clients. And so, it all comes full circle. And, market signals happened while I was there. I knew I was getting ready to kind of bring all of my background and experience into what became Illoominus. But yeah, that's a little bit of the journey that got me ready for this.
Wow. I think there are sort of three things that I have heard in your story that are so true to truly hearted, just can't not be an entrepreneur kind of people. And
Yeah.
one of those, is that sort of left brain, right brain, creative problem solver. So many of these episodes, we hear people say, I just had to ask why, and I just had to ask how. And, what I hear in the second part of your story, which I think is so important to press on, is you didn't just jump into it. You said you spent a decade really laying the foundation. And one of the things we'll talk about today is the importance of really, laying a foundation and learning, and what do you do with that? So I think that's a really, really important reminder to people who are entrepreneurs. Not they don't want to be an entrepreneur, they are an entrepreneur. And the third is that pay it forward. So many entrepreneurs get started because they see a challenge or a problem or an opportunity, and they focus so much on the challenge, problem, or opportunity, and then get into it and think about, well, who's impacted by it? What I hear you saying is all along the way, there's been this sense of this is part of a community, this is part of an ecosystem, then there are people involved. And I think that that's really apropos given what Illoominus focuses on. So thank you for sharing that story with us. So with all of that and all of your preparation and all of your learning and opportunity spotting, what was it that prompted you to start Illoominus? So, what was the problem, and what now does Illoominus do to solve that problem?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like just to kind of maybe pull on what you're saying and maybe tie it into, what was that moment when you said, I can't not do this. But I think along the way, absolutely I started working towards companies. And it was always kind of in the same themes of my background's economics. My father was an economics professor. I've always been, when I was in Peace Corps, when I was in graduate school, economic development, workforce development, thinking about in massive change, how do you prepare a workforce to be able to think about that? And so that was always, kind of my background. And when I got to Accenture, because I had done that work in workforce development, I'd started programs on, tech apprenticeships. I think we had some of your portcos participate in some of those programs back when I was at Invest Atlanta. I ended up getting drawn to HR technology. I was also playing the game of, hey, I work in a region, DC to Florida over to Texas. I have a very diverse industry base. If I do it right with some HR technology, that's a horizontal, and I can go and replicate that across bringing emerging tech into my Fortune 2000 clients. And I think I fell into HR technology because I came from this economic development background where we're studying labor, we're studying a workforce, but all of a sudden I got to do all of that kind of work, but actually closely with companies where I could see that I was making real impact. And so while I was at Accenture, lots of market signals, right? You're kind of getting the aggregate of what everybody's experiencing in key trends. And I think there was a part of me that knew I'm really going to know like what the next 5 years is going to look like when I leave. I didn't know when I was going to leave, but really kind of the problem that came up that I could not stop working on. I could not stop working on it is I was looking at, and I was there during 2020. So much happened during that time. Murder of George Floyd, work from home, COVID. What does the future of work look like? And there were some key themes that I saw there where it was the future of work. We have no idea. Like it's going to change. And even sometimes I'll plot out like a timeline on a slide for a CHRO. And it's like the fires are so intense of like growing companies, contracting companies, and that rate of change is not going to slow down. It's only speeding up. And when you think about the tools and the resources that are there to support companies, they're absolutely archaic and they're not prepared to help leaders through this change. So the big things I was seeing is organizations that wanted to better prepare themselves for the future. That means strategic thinking. And when you looked at it, the time and the number of tools has only gone up. But at the time, organizations, and these are even the ones that are using like the end-to-end tools, like the Workdays of the world, they still had over a dozen different systems that weren't talking to each other. So when you think about, I'm no longer going to hire Noelle for a job in the future. I'm going to hire Noelle for the skill set she has for the job I need today. And then I'm going to move her into where I need her in 24 months. But when you think about internal mobility, that means that's an employee journey. And in the same way, you're a marketer, you know how the goal now is how do I understand customer 360, the entire employee journey or the entire experience of a customer? HR has no way to have the employee 360. And so that's what we set out to build is to really help future-proof organizations to be able to move people through the organization. The other big light bulb while I was there is that we were working with Fortune 2000 clients. You think of the Coca-Colas of the world or these very large organizations that have hundreds of thousands of employees. And they may have the resources to create the gold standard and to create this, custom business specific people data program. But the reality is that the 90% of companies out there don't have the resources to be able to build that kind of system. And the reality, again, is as we started doing our discovery, is that the vast majority of companies are looking at the same thing. And they're thinking if they're a smaller, mid-sized company today, I have to build out a Tableau platform. I've got to build this in Excel on my own because I don't have the resources to have enterprise technology. And that's going to take my team 9 to 12 months to build out from scratch. And so we really saw the opportunity to bring that type of capability at a price point that works for a mid-market company with the resources to really leapfrog them from, I've never done this because I thought I didn't have the resources or the capabilities internally, into now everybody needs this kind of data. How do we bring that to them, accelerate that progress so that they can focus on those business specific pieces?
Wow, that's really amazing. So you discovered this kind of data that exists in multiple types of companies, regardless of maturity, and then figured out that there was a major pain point for smaller companies, emerging companies, SMBs that couldn't afford to buy it, off the shelf, or so nothing turnkey, or, really didn't have the resources to build out something sufficient probably for what that's not probably their skill set. Even if they think that they're going to build it in-house, they're probably going to pull something together that looks an awful lot like, Excel spreadsheets and conversations.
Right.
But, does Illoominus then, say you start at an early stage and you have a rapid growth company that maybe hits hyperscale, right? Does the product then work at scale, or how does this people analytics, resource play within the HR tech stack, particularly as that tech stack is probably, starting to smoke because everything's growing so fast?
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, Rochelle, I'm gonna reuse your tech stack starting to smoke one, because that's really good.
It's all you.
Yeah, so what we've built at Illoominus is, we've built a turnkey people analytics platform that essentially brings together your data that already exists within your systems.
Okay.
And what we're doing it is integrating it, bringing it together so that you can actually understand the interplay of the data across the employee journey. So we're not trying to tackle everything on day one. What we tackle is critical HR tech stack. So typically for an organization, what that might mean is an HRIS system, so like a system of record type tool, a recruiting tool, employee engagement surveys, and then performance or pay data. By us being able to bring those four systems together, we have everything from hire to fire type metrics and understanding how somebody's moving through the organization. So, especially as you're in hyper growth, and we've even talked to a portfolio company of yours that's very much in that type of scenario right now, where performance and high performance is everything to the organization. And so they need to quickly understand what's working and what's not. A lot of organizations look through like a lens of we evaluate performance once a year. That's so stale, and it really depends on like what you remember from yesterday versus this organization that we've been talking to. They've gotten down to the quarterly level, which is really incredible for a high growth organization. And so what they're looking at is across my organization, do I understand how these key data points are intersecting and interacting with each other? So one of the things that they do, which is brilliant, is being able to look at an org chart and say, hey, like we're really focused on creating great managers. We're a hyper growth company where maybe somebody that started 3 years ago is now like director level. They've gotten no training on how to be a manager, and they've grown really fast just based on their tenure. What we want to be able to understand is, yes, they've put in the work. Yes, you're going through hyper growth, but what's happening with the team below them? Because if we look at the org chart and we say, hey, Gregory has been with us 3 years, he's put in his time, so we've promoted him. Maybe he was doing like customer service and now like he got the really hard calls. And so now we're going to give him a good role. Well, if Gregory is managing this team underneath him and you're seeing there's high performers that are there that have low engagement scores, that have high attrition, okay, big red flag, because that whatever is happening is impacting everybody below Gregory. And that sure as heck is going to also impact your KPIs on the business as well. And so really at those key moments, like, yes, you're growing really quickly, but thinking about being able to have real-time data on what's working and not so that you're making those changes quickly. And you're also de-risking losing some of those high performers when something might not be working within your management structure.
Yeah, that's amazing. So really does allow, the organization to be proactive with, who they're promoting, how they're training, maybe spotting the Peter principle before it gets to be a real problem, all of those different factors. I think that's amazing. Let's kind of lean into, you talked a little bit about KPIs.
Yeah.
We know that setting strong KPIs, tracking them consistently, like you're talking about quarterly, you're talking about real-time data, is really at the heart of enduring business stability.
Mhm.
Um, for a really small team. So say you're just getting started, you're a team of 20. What is the value of really digging in and tracking this people data that early? I mean, it almost feels like you have enough visibility across the organization that you maybe don't need this, but it definitely sounds like you do. So help us to understand why people data and this function is important for early stage companies as a core KPI.
Yeah, I would say that part of it, and just in full transparency with Illoominus, like typically what we see is organizations starting at about 400 employees and
Okay.
above, up until about 15,000 or so. That's really our sweet spot, because especially at that point, typically, like, you're starting to get into that high growth mode, or you're a mid-market company and you're thinking about things like acquisitions. You're thinking about how you want to manage this for scale. And so that's a really great time when we start working with companies.
Perfect.
I love what you're saying, though, is like, before you ever even get ready for something like that, like, what should you be doing? And it's not necessary that, you're going to have this like really intensive built out system, but if you're going to hit those inflection points, you're going to need a strong foundation in place. And what you're doing by starting to track some of this data and include this data in your regular leadership board type reports is that you're saying that it's important, and you're
Mm.
signaling that it becomes an expectation for it to be important. Because this organization that we were just talking about on like high performance, it's amazing what they're doing as an organization, but it is because they have emphasized the importance of their people within this growth journey. And so if you're starting to introduce that data early on in your board meetings and like a regular KPI deck, they can be simple metrics. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but it's looking at things like headcount growth. It's looking at things like engagement, performance, calling out individuals. That starts laying the foundation for when I think about how I'm measuring what's happening within the business. I'm making sure that this is an important part of the conversation, because it still really blows our mind of where organizations may be around HR data when, especially in this environment, everyone's talking about things like profitability and margins. And everyone's pointing towards, like, this is how do we get to, how do we get in the black? How do we get to these places? Well, your number one expense of the entire business is going to be your people. And so if I'm at 20 people, I'm looking how I'm getting to 30, I'm looking at how I'm getting to my goals. Are the people that you have actually working for the organization, and are you working for them? And so being able to starting to think about, we're not always just looking at top line. We're also looking at the whole business and how the business is performing. And the way you get there is by better understanding your people data and building that muscle early.
I think that is so smart. You brought up a couple of things, and one of them was in these conversations, in these growth conversations, a pitch conversation, for example. And one of the things that BIP Ventures talks about is a track horse jockey model. So when we're looking at promising companies, we're thinking about track, horse, and jockey. The track, what is the market? Right? The
Mhm.
horse, what is the business model? The jockey, what does the leadership look like? And that's not just the founder, but that's the entire team. And so to your point, the ability to come in with data, with a story that says, as we've grown, we've brought these people in for this reason, and we've tracked their performance, and we've maybe moved them around to optimize their skill sets or where they need to be. And our ability to allocate dollars to talent, that actually is a very, very strategic indicator of a really high functioning company. And I think on the flip side of that, as you see companies, as they're growing and they're right sizing and perhaps having to do a riff or a strategic right sizing, knowing, you're not just going to take it out at the mid level. You're going to be strategic and, take a scalpel to the process and not just a sweep. You're informed.
Right. You make
Yeah.
better decisions because you're using the data to make those decisions.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's amazing. So, let's talk about that sort of mid-market, that 400 to 1,500 sized company. They're building out their systems. There's a lot that's happening there to ensure that the teams are not siloing, that culture is strong, that the leadership is still able to sort of reach everybody when they don't know the names of all of their employees anymore. And
Yep.
they're looking for different tools to be able to do that. I would imagine that there's a risk of overcomplicating the process. Do you have any suggestions for companies as they're really beginning to implement these types of resources? Where should they put their focus to keep this from being overcomplicated?
Yeah. One thing that we've started seeing quite a bit, especially in this part of the market, is organizations. And I think it's painful for some organizations that are at this size right now, like 1,600, 2,000 employees type organizations that, put in really heavy enterprise like systems and spent a whole lot of dollars on we're going to get the best of the best, but it takes so many. Those systems are designed for enterprises that have resources to unlock them. So having dedicated analysts around those systems. And so what I would say is really it's not about maybe the names of things you've heard, but really trying to understand like what's the support model of that technology that you're putting in place to really make sure that you need to be agile, you need to be nimble. What we're really excited about is some of the, Gen AI features that we've been adding on where in the past, the way those kinds of legacy systems were set up is like, I want to be able to answer a question. So I need to go and create a new storyboard and I need to like get a developer to put that in the storyboard so I can answer the question. And then it's like not even relevant anymore. And so I think really the ability for you to have an agile system that's going to be adding in this technology that allows you to get access to the answers faster is something I would really look at as, are they best positioned for an organization of your size? The other thing is, I don't think it does need to be complicated. There are point solutions for absolutely everything in HR, and a lot of them aren't really necessary. And so, focus on the basics, get a good HRIS that pays your people on time and like does the basics. You can also get away with some recruiting tools, employee engagement surveys. Like, yes, there's technology out there, but a Survey Monkey or a Google Forms sends out a CSV, and through another tool like Illoominus or a BI type tool, you can analyze that. So I think there's ways to save on your tech stack. But I would say solid HRIS, ATS, engagement, and some type of like performance or pay system would be the solids that we would initially look at and then start thinking about like a benefits, what you're doing around benefits and managing that, as well as like a learning and development type solution as kind of like that critical tech stack as you're getting started. And then what I would just say is like, this is something that is internal to the company. We see a lot of people kicking the can down the road on some of these types of investments. But just, to tell you the very real impacts, I was talking to a chief people officer that actually may have been connected to you all as well, that exited in the health tech space
Mhm.
a couple of years ago. But as she was going through the transaction and the diligence, part of the reason that that went smoothly was her having a strong data foundation to be able to pull quick reports. And so that's something that we're starting to see. There's very real and tangible results of being able to have this foundation in place if that type of transaction is something that you're thinking about in the near future. And we even have a resource on like, here's like the top 10 um, reports that we would suggest putting together that can be pulled from a not overcomplicated tech stack.
That's great. Is that resource on your website?
It will be by the time that we do this episode. Yeah, we'll
Wonderful.
put that up there.
Okay,
And
perfect.
that way I think there's very real things of like that's helping you demonstrate the value of the company, demonstrate the people that, is helping you to push up the price point that you're getting there. And really like putting your people in the right light.
Oh, that's great. You've mentioned having a chief people officer. Is it
Mhm.
necessary for a company to have, a chief people officer, a human resources lead, before implementing technology like this?
Like which, like,
Well, like Illuminus, like
okay.
a technology that allows for all of this data. Is it important to have someone who is managing it and understanding, what should be looked at?
Um, I would say having somebody that has a strategic direction on knowing how to use data to help make decisions is important. For something like Illuminous. And usually what we see is, by that point, 400 employees, someone typically
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
have a chief people officer. For companies that are earlier in their journeys, what I'm seeing is actually a lot of companies that are like Series A, Series B, tapping into fractional chief people officers. And so there's a growing, really strong community of fractional CPOs that, maybe you can't afford to have some of this top talent off the bat, but they can really help shape direction and strategy for somebody that's working on your team in more of like a day-to-day capacity and put you on the track so that as you're ready to make that hire, you have things in place and you know what you need of that individual. I would say the role of HR is changing so very much, and
Yeah.
it is not an administrative role. It's not a party planning committee by any means. It's someone that's really thinking about how to create high performance within your organization. And so, before you hire for those roles, really thinking about, what you're asking from that individual, because there's very different types of HR professionals as well. And you want to make sure that you have the right alignment on what you're looking for from that role and who you're looking for as well.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. In the short half an hour we've been talking, you've mentioned, paying attention to the bottom line and learning and understanding, management versus leadership. There are so many different points, and it seems like they all do sort of orient back to this person. And I'm glad that you brought up the fractional role as well. That is certainly something that we have explored in a lot of the other core leadership areas of companies. And so
Yeah.
it's important to remind people that, the chief people officer HR role is no different than, your finance department or your marketing department. I mean, a lot of these fractional folks are really deeply experienced and probably bring a perspective that it gives a little oversight that maybe someone who's kind of coming up within the organization and is in the weeds a bit, might lack.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful guidance. So as we wrap up, I want to make sure that we are doing for you what you do for others and sort of pay it forward. This is your opportunity to tell us a little bit about, what's going on, anything exciting with the company, and where people can find out more and keep an eye on you, or maybe work with you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, and thanks, Rochelle, for that. So I shared a little bit previously about, problem that we're solving of bringing this type of data to organizations. We're gearing up for some really exciting announcements in the next month or so. I think that what we've seen within the market is that these middle market companies really have a need to have these types of insights quickly, and at a price point that makes sense for them, and in an experience that they can actually utilize without having to add in additional developers to make the system work. So we've continued to work with customers through our turnkey platform over the last couple of years and have been listening very carefully. And so, what we're excited to talk about in the next couple of weeks, and we'd love you all to tune in and learn a little bit more, is how we're actually bringing development to the community. So, really putting the platform in the hands of our customers to share best practices across organizations. We started Illoominus because we saw there was such an opportunity to really know what works for the first time through data across companies and to share those best practices and insights. We're doing a lot of that today, but now what we're moving into is allowing our customers and our users to be able to share their very best views and best practices on people analytics with each other. And so we've, for a while, run a community for chief people officers that we bring together regularly to share best practices. Now we bring some of that experience into the data platform itself. So I'm really excited about where we're going and what's next. And I'm really excited about just this has been a chronically under-resourced part of the company and the business for a long time. And so the innovations that we can bring to HR teams through AI, through automation, through workflow automation weren't even possible 4 months ago. And the things that we're able to put in your hands now, plain text, I can ask any question of my data. I can then put that into a custom dashboard and build a KPI tracker in like 10 to 15 minutes. That type of thing was not even possible. And so we're just so excited about what this is really going to do for our users, and what this is going to do, I think, for the HR, leader community as a whole.
Wow. I love it. I love community. I think that is incredible. And what that will unlock from a visibility and a knowledge standpoint is incredibly powerful. And I, for one, am just delighted to hear about, have a conversation about the role of AI, and not in the sense that it's going to take jobs, but that it's going to enrich them.
Yeah.
So I think this is all very exciting, and we will be watching and excited to help you share all of this news with, all the listeners and all of our friends in the community. So this is great. Noelle, I am so grateful to you. Thank you for joining us.
Grateful to you as well. Thanks,
Ask
Rochelle.
more questions. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so check out, we're on LinkedIn and sharing, what we're seeing across our customers and community regularly. So check out our LinkedIn page, Illoominus, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter there where we'll share tips and tricks that we're seeing. You can also find more on Illoominus.com. If you wouldn't mind linking it in the show notes, Rochelle, it's ILLOOMINUS.com. And there you can actually, see a small demo of the platform, kind of dig in and learn a little bit more about us. But, everybody's trying to figure this out in terms of HR data. And if there's any ways that we can help you all or point you in the right direction of some additional resources, more than happy to do so.
Amazing. Thank you, Noelle. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Extraordinary Pursuits. If you enjoyed what you heard, please like and share the show. It helps others to find us. Now, let's go build the future of the innovation economy.